All right. So I'm going to have you start off by taking a piece of paper and folding it into 4 sections. Um, so you're going to have one section that is reserved for looking at a map and kind of giving 2 observations. And then the other 3 sections are going to be set aside for primary sector, tertiary sector, and secondary sector. Not necessarily in that order. So do primary sector first, then secondary, and then tertiary. All right, so today we're going to be talking about the idea of economic sectors. So essentially, this is an important topic for this class, and it tells us a lot about the development levels of a country. So and each of these kind of goes with a different part of class. So students are going to be able to examine the spatial distribution of economic systems and talk about the role of geography in economic development. So I'm going to have you start off, pause this, and I want you to look at and make 2 observations kind of about this map. So what you see here is the percentage of the total workforce that is engaged in what we are going to call the primary sector. So agriculture, forestry, fishing, and the harnessing of natural resources. All right. So we have essentially 4 different sectors of the economy. We are focused on the first 3. We'll introduce quaternary later and talk about what the quaternary sector is. But we're going to focus today on the primary sector, the secondary sector, and the tertiary sector. So essentially the question that these answer are, what are the types of jobs that exist within each country? So this tells us a lot about internally what's going on at each kind of economic development level within a country. So we're going to start with a primary sector. And the definition for the primary sector are jobs, occupations that involve the extraction of natural resources from the earth. Okay, so the most important one of those, as you can kind of see from the picture, is agriculture, right? Is farming. So you have farming as kind of the biggest part of the primary sector, but also a few other types of jobs that would fall into that. So harnessing of natural resources would include things like mining, would include things like fishing, um, and other sorts of sort of professional natural resource extraction that exists. So one of the main most important things about this is we are going to see really, really high levels of primary sector work in countries where subsistence agriculture is prevalent. So in countries where you have lots and lots of subsistence agriculture, you also obviously have a lot of people who work in the primary sector. So oftentimes that is an economic indicator. All right, so primary sector jobs that involve the extraction of natural resources from the earth. So the next one is the secondary sector. So these are kind of shorthand. We have farming as kind of shorthand for primary sector. Kind of shorthand for secondary sector is manufacturing. So essentially jobs and occupations that involve the turning of natural resources into usable products. So essentially, you think of, are you extracting natural resources? No. Are you turning the things extracted in the primary sector into something that people can use? And if the answer is yes, then that type of job would be in the secondary sector, right? So any sort of manufacturing goes pretty well into this. Here you can see a few examples. All right. And the last one, the tertiary sector. So the third type of sector kind of that we look at is called the tertiary sector, which is essentially the provision of services. So services are kind of a big, broad category that include lots and lots and lots and lots of things, including working in some sort of customer service job or working kind of in retail or food service. Things like being an accountant or being a lawyer or things like that. So lots and lots of jobs involving the provision of services. All right, so now we're going to get to the part where we're thinking about the connection to economic development. So I would say we can essentially kind of substitute the terms less developed country, developing country, and more developed country for pre-industrial, industrial, and post-industrial. And what we essentially see is that as countries go through development, the amount of jobs in the primary sector decreases significantly. So you have a big decrease in primary sector work, right? We talked a lot about why subsistence agriculture subsides within a country as it develops. That has a lot to do with population structure. That has a lot to do with urbanization. But essentially, we see the amount of people who work in subsistence agriculture go down as a country develops. We look at what happens with the manufacturing sector of an economy. Kind of in the beginning, you have some people that are the town blacksmith or something that's a manufacturing job, right? But what we see as countries go through industrialization is these kind of increase significantly. So you have the secondary sector kind of rising during the time of being a developing country. So think about where a lot of the manufacturing takes place in the world today. Places like India, China, a lot of countries in Southeast Asia, countries in Central America like Mexico. So a lot of countries that are in kind of the developing category have secondary sector jobs or a significant amount of secondary sector jobs. And then what happens a little bit as countries go through kind of into the final stage of development is we start to see this tail off a little bit, and the amount of jobs in the manufacturing sector, the secondary sector actually goes down a little bit. But still, manufacturing output usually remains pretty high because of automation and other things. And the last one we are concerned with is the tertiary sector, so the amount of service jobs. So again, kind of like secondary, you always have jobs that are the town barkeep and stuff. I don't know, I'm thinking a lot about colonial times. But what happens as a country goes through industrialization is the amount of tertiary sector jobs, kind of service-based jobs, increases significantly. So again, the connection to development is that we see low levels of tertiary jobs in less developed countries, kind of mid-level or rising levels of tertiary jobs in developing countries, and then relatively high levels of tertiary jobs in more developed countries. So you can see that a little bit with the history of the United States. So thinking about the U.S. in the 1850s, we were predominantly a workforce that was engaged in agriculture, oftentimes subsistence agriculture, other plantation-style agriculture, other types of agriculture. So as we continue to go through our industrialization, you can see kind of a big boom between 1850 and 1900 in the manufacturing sector, and also kind of the rise of the tertiary sector as well. So that continues into 1950. You see the majority of jobs by 1950 are in the tertiary sector, the provision of services. And now you can see what it roughly still looks like this today, even though this graphic's a little bit old. Around 80 to 85% of workers in the United States work in the provision of services. Manufacturing jobs are kind of around 15 to 20%. And then only about 3% of our country's workforce is engaged in the extraction of natural resources. Most of those people in some sort of farming, right? So you can kind of see this in the history of the United States. And you can also see it in kind of countries throughout the world today. So let me get rid of this bar. We got Mozambique, Argentina, and Canada. And we can see Mozambique still has a relatively high percentage of jobs in the primary sector. You can kind of see the other sectors where they break down. Argentina is kind of right in between being a developing and a more developed country. So you pretty much see that within their numbers. And then Canada kind of has the distribution that we would associate with a more developed country, right? So definite tie to economic development. And we're going to be focused a lot on farming in this, but this is one of the first big things that we started thinking about, and why subsistence farming is such a big deal in less developed countries. So this helps to at least start to explain that. All right, thanks. Bye.